Welcome back to Trending in Ed. I'm Mike Palmer. I'm back from an amazing South by Southwest EDU. We're going to dig into some of the takeaways and share some of the sound that we captured while down there. It was really a remarkable trip. I've done over 650 interviews over the years with this podcast and gained some insights along the way. One of the places where I really come away transformed every year is South by Southwest EDU. I've been going since 2019 and have had the good fortune to record podcast episodes while down there each spring. And 2025 was no exception. At the latest South by Southwest EDU, we recorded a full panel session in front of a live audience from the podcast stage. I was joined by Mike Yates, Jenn Stredler, and Julia Shatilo to share our March Madness of learning trends. Each of us brought 4. Mike was there from Teach for America's Reinvention Lab. He's leading AI efforts there. Jenn is the managing director for The Common Group, a boutique consulting firm focused on education, workforce development, and employer talent practices. And Julia is the director of programming for South by Southwest EDU. So we got a nice cross-section of perspectives. The session is part of the Convergence track, which is something I really love about South by Southwest, and is something that this podcast shares in its philosophy, where we're not about closed conversations, we're not about conversations in silos, we're really about making surprising connections, happy accidents, serendipity. Education can feel vast and siloed. Our March Madness conversations at South by really encourage silo busting and finding those themes that are shared across emerging tech, including AI, workforce development, early childhood, K-12, right on through post-secondary. And this year's panel was no exception. Plus, we get the chance to engage with a live audience, and that's something that I truly view as a privilege and an honor, is to really engage with the practitioners who are leading with their hearts down at South by Southwest EDU. I'd encourage folks to try to get down there. We'll share a little bit more from that conversation in a bit. We'll also be sharing clips from my interview with Jenny Nash from Lego Impact Education, who I've had on the show before, but never in person, and certainly never in person with my wife and 6-year-old son, Matthew, who was there with us. We also got some time in the Expo Hall with Matthew. He had a blast. I would encourage folks, if you can find a kid-friendly education conference, take your kids there. It's better than Disney World. He looks forward to it every year, and it's really something remarkable. Those experiences hopefully will last a lifetime. I still remember Sunil Gundaria, who's been on the podcast a few times from Age of Learning. He talks about the importance of developing a learner identity in kids. It's something they do at Age of Learning, but it's also something I think we need to do as parents, and I really feel privileged to be able to get down there with Matthew and my wife, and hopefully we're able to bring some of that magic back with you. We'll get some quick takes on our experiences in the Expo Hall and in some of the sessions that really lit up my son. Beyond that, I did get time with Jenny and also with Lindsay Whorton and Dana Stephenson, who are leading in K-12 leadership development in the case of Lindsay, and really the future of work, experience gap, and experiential learning, project-based learning is something that Dana Stephenson at Riipen has been doing. I've really been a fan of Riipen for years. Workforce development and the future of work is something that's very close to my heart. It's something that's been central to this podcast since we started, and it's great to get the opportunity to talk to folks who are really moving the needle in that space. Riipen has been doing tremendous work, really taking off as kind of a first mover that's really exploding in the space. And even there's not enough capacity there where the problem we're facing, where folks are emerging from their post-secondary education, Gen Z, which was a theme that really was percolating out there. Gen Z is not always ready to take on that first good job. They can't find it. They don't have the work experience that they need for it. Higher ed may not be fully equipped to give them what they need. Riipen and the work that Dana's doing are really making an impact there. We'll talk about all of that. Hopefully you'll find some value along the way. This is Mike Palmer, and this is Trending in Education. All right, now I'm going to take you back, the Wayback Machine. I'm going to take you back to March of 2019. I was the vice president of digital media at Kaplan Test Prep. I had started Trending in Ed 3 years ago with my colleague, Brandon Jones, who was my co-host, and Dan Strafford, who was the producer. Started it back then. We were a few hundred episodes in, and we had the opportunity to do a March Madness of Learning Trends from the Expo Hall at South by Southwest EDU. Jumped at the chance, went down there, had Ashley Manka, who was at ACT at the time, on as our guest, and things started. The ball started to roll. The ball is still rolling after a couple of pandemic influenced years where we moved online and we started to find our way. Come 2022, I was back down there again, this time with Tarlin Ray and Dan Harrison, talking about two of the podcasts I'd launched, a sports podcast with Tarlin called Running It Back, and blues music and sociology and true crime podcast called Inside Jackson Station that I launched with Dan Harrison. Amazing stuff there back in 22. We remoted in Terry Givens, who actually had a bout of COVID at the time, very 2022 of us. And then starting in 2023, I was bringing my wife and son down. My wife, Dr. Robin Naughton, is an information science doctor who works out of the library at Queens College, part of the CUNY University system. So a lot of reasons for Robin to be down there with me, and she made an excellent co-host for each of the last two runs. In fact, her submission last year, Mental Models, wound up winning the 2024 instance of the March Madness tournament. But this year was a little different. We decided that Robin could focus on Matthew and I could focus on whatever I needed to get done, including running this panel. As I mentioned, I was joined by Mike Yates from TFA's Reinvention Lab, Jenn Stredler, who's the managing director of the Common Group, and Julia Shatilo from South by Southwest EDU. In front of a live audience, we had a lot of engagement. We had a lot of fun. It'll be coming out soon as an episode. We're going to jump in here with a clip. And I just want to say thanks to South by Southwest EDU for supporting us along the way. Thanks to our listeners who have supported us, who have voted for us on Panel Picker and shown up. You know, we had a nice audience there, and we've been able to do that throughout the years. Hopefully, we'll be able to do more of this. If you have ideas, if you have conferences that are coming that you think we could make an impact and do something interesting at, I'd love to hear from you. And with no further ado, here's a quick clip of some of the fun that happened from the podcast stage live in Austin, South by Southwest 2025. Hope you enjoy.
Like, I resolved 10 years ago that, like, if you ask me to apply, like, fill out an application for a job, I won't. Like, I just won't. I got on LinkedIn for that reason.
Right.
Because I want to build relationships with people, and when they need somebody who has my skill set, they call me.
Right. Because the expression is, it's not who you know, it's who knows you, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is the people that work with me hear this very often. You are harming yourself if you choose to turn, like, every single day you choose to turn your nose up at social media. You are harming yourself because you're refusing to share your ideas in an open marketplace where somebody can find you in a world where AI is destroying the job application process. So every day that you say, I'm not going to post on LinkedIn and TikTok is for children, even though the age skews on TikTok skew heavier towards millennials than any other age group, you have chosen to become irrelevant in a job market that is only about who knows you, because that's what's coming in the future.
That was Mike Yates from Teach for America's Reinvention Lab, dropping some knowledge and some hot takes, spitting fire. As I like to say, he and I even had some disagreements that I think led into some engaging spaces. Got a lot of input from Jenn and Julia and from a really engaged crowd. We'll be releasing that episode in about a week, so keep an eye on the feed for that. There's really nothing like the energy of live, and that's something that struck me over the years, even as I've become an expert on remote, focusing on live online at Kaplan, and then breaking out on my own with the podcast and consulting with folks about their online delivery and their external messaging, their brand presence in the new and emerging universe. you kind of have to leverage these online tools. I couldn't go anywhere without my Zoom room and my Descript login. But at the same time, nothing replaces the power of in person, the power of shared experiences, whether they be attending a keynote or engaging in a panel like the one that we did, or getting to know folks informally in line or at happy hours really throughout. South by does a great job of really encouraging those types of connections. And I would say it was really remarkable doing it this year with a 6-year-old who's starting to spread his own wings a little bit socially. So it's fun to see my son develop and to kind of drop him into the experimental cauldron that is South by Southwest EDU and see what emerges with him. He's grown a bunch, and we'll see. He may even be a future panelist, a future host on episodes as we continue. One of the things that I really have loved is being able to have conversations about education that's specifically relevant to him. I can't think of a brand that is more on the nose than Lego for that. And Dr. Jenny Nash has been doing this work about education impact in the US. And really, she's well known throughout. I was walking around the Expo hall, folks were shouting her out, and I will continue to do so myself. I was scheduled to interview with her, and my wife and son were supposed to be doing other stuff at the time, but I figured it's Lego. He'd already been there before. He built a wonderful cheetah with my wife the day before. So I figured, let's bring him along, see what happens. And not surprisingly, Jenny and the team at Lego were happy to bring Matthew along for the ride. Not to mention my wife, like I said, is an educator, works at Queens College. Lots of interesting conversations and, convergences can happen. And you'll hear a little bit of this when you hear some of my conversation with Dr. Jenny Nash from Lego's Curiosity Park at South by Southwest EDU, with my wife, Dr. Robin Naughton, and my son, Matthew Palmer. Let's listen into a little bit of that now.
And it's all like Lego, so you could even build up and down and around the controller, which is cool.
Absolutely.
But to Jenny's point, that the part of engineering is figuring out what kind of problems you're trying to solve.
But also just put great ideas. This is how ideas come to life, right? I think with Lego Education, we're really focused on the power that hands-on learning brings, which we know. We recently did the State of Engagement report, where we were able to really bring in basically that confirmation that, science teachers, everybody feels like students learn best when they're engaged and confident when they're engaged, but unfortunately they're not engaged. So about a third of principals, teachers, everyone was saying, unfortunately kids are just not really engaged right now. That is obviously our focus, our passion, and we're really just looking at how can we bring that engagement back in.
Jenny was great. It was amazing for that to be a full-on family affair for my wife, my son, and me with Legos. What more could a family want? And you might have heard a little bit of that. Lego is now working on, it's already in development, it's not available yet, is movement. So some remote controls that you can trick out by building with Legos, and then movable cars. So Matthew was certainly in his happy place at the Lego experience down at South by Southwest EDU. Just closing out quickly on a few more takeaways as a parent who brought his wife and son to the podcast. One of my trends for 2025 is what I call model flexibility. This is kind of building on my wife's winning trend from last year, which is mental models. We all need to be flexible with our mental models, understand when to shift, when to move them around, when to adjust them to the context. Certainly true in this political climate. How do you still achieve your objectives when language becomes out of favor? And, to protect grants and protect federal funding, we have to adjust how we talk. It's also true as a parent, where having to shift between daddy mode and interviewer mode. It was easy with Jenny, where, in some ways I was wearing all my hats at one time. But then at other times I had to really shift into a different set of frameworks and language that really will resonate more with the audience. Something we're going to continue to work on and hopefully give folks a little more clarity around the language that is resonating. And as language leadership emerges, that is really something that's been foundational to trending in ed. How do we use the right language? How do we identify when new and emerging language perhaps captures something better? So that's something we'll be talking about. Shout outs as a parent before I code switch into a few other interview highlights. One is STEMfinity did a great job in the Expo hall providing a cross-section of STEM-inspired maker kits. We talked about the maker's mindset and how to instill that, just like a learner identity. How do we instill a maker identity in our kids? How do we equip our schools and our educators and our parents in homes with the tools that we need to really inspire kids? Lego's a great example, and there were a few others that we saw through STEMfinity. Bill and Allison did a great job making us feel at home there, and it's hopefully we'll continue those conversations. If you haven't heard of STEMfinity, check them out. They're very much in the KiwiCo Love Every Baby vein that we started on with Matthew, and we're certainly learning more and continuing that as we go to South by Southwest EDU each year and get surprised and delighted by what's going on in the Expo hall. The other standout I'd call attention to is a company called Ambessa Play, which is a STEM maker kit, but they've been focusing on designing kits that can work with refugees and others who may not have access to the stability and infrastructure that many of us take for granted. I thought they were a great company and a cool counterpoint to perhaps some of the more battery-powered and engineering-inspired maker kits. Matthew was really drawn to their flashlight that was crank-powered, that he could make himself. And it is a reminder of some of the thinking that goes into universal design for learning and designing for everybody, that frequently when you design something that is inclusive and accounts for some boundary cases, that opens up the thinking and opens up some of the opportunity to build things for the rest of us. Certainly was true with Matthew. We're going to have to follow up with Ambessa to make sure we get the crank flashlight together. I was trying to figure out whether we could hook Matthew up to a bicycle that might power our home, among other things. We'll see whether that actually comes to fruition, but get to South by Southwest EDU. Shout out again to Greg Rosenbaum and team, Kayla, Julia, Liz, all the folks down there do a wonderful job. I wanted to get more time with Ron Reed, who's the founder. I'm going to try to circle back with Ron and get a little more time with him. He's since retired from South by Southwest EDU, but his spirit certainly permeates the whole place. He's kind of the Obi-Wan Kenobi of South by Southwest EDU. Get down there, do what you can to make a point of being there. You're going to be surprised. And also, beginning of March is a wonderful time to be in Austin. We've had the opportunity the last 3 years to meet up with my cousin, Dana Gastick French, who's a multilingual learner, an educator, and a practitioner in K-12. And some of her connections down there, Poonam Saxena and Deshana Reed, have become part of our regular agenda out there. We're connecting not just with folks who are running big organizations like Dana Stephenson, but also folks who are solopreneurs like myself, practitioners in the world of education, trying to make an impact. And it's been amazing there because now my son is connected to my cousin in a way that's very intimate and meaningful. And like I said, those are some of the connections that will last a lifetime. Those experiences were great. Flexibly shifting now to my model of myself as an individual, a few things did jump out. One was one of the keynotes, Anne-Laure really impressed me with her deep dive into her new book, Tiny Experiments, How to Live Freely in a Goal-Obsessed World. In a very vulnerable and accessible way, she invited us into her journey of self-discovery that led to her leaving a successful career at Google to study neuroscience and develop a lot of the frameworks that she outlines in Tiny Experiments. You can't come away from South by Southwest without some inspiration, but you may not know what to do with that energy. And that's where I thought Anne-Laure's book really provides some great frameworks to structure small experiments. One of the things I've been talking about here in 2025 is learning how to bank small wins. It's easy to talk about how the winds are against us and how the larger system is shook to the point where I can't really get anything done. I'd say a reframe of that is, where is there opportunity for movement? Where can I make an impact? And then once you identify that, how can I do some tiny experiments to see how I can get to a better place? Anne-Laure provides a lot of examples of her own experience, kind of overcoming her shyness to the point where she's standing on stage doing a keynote in front of 1,000 folks in the audience there. That's done through small experiments, through things that are manageable, stuff that you can chew on. I keep thinking about the impact of agile product development and agile thinking in the world in general, and how it's starting to break in. It's certainly something I've seen in the higher ed space, where places where you can adopt agile inspired thinking can really make an impact. But she also was able to bring in neuroscience, and that's something that I'm hoping we can bring to bear a little bit more, because neuroscience, she was talking about the neuroscience that really leads to this shift that we see from maybe up to around 6, my son's age, to later in your K-12 education career, where you shift from curiosity to performance, and we seek out certainty. And, there's biological evolutionary reasons for that. We want to be safe. We want to scan for threats. But frequently we feel threatened when we really aren't. And we need to push ourselves into those uncertain places to truly learn and truly grow. So tiny experiments. We've ordered the book. It's coming, and I'm hoping to find time with Anne-Laure LeCompte in the future. Her keynote was probably the most impactful to me on a personal level, and I definitely wanted to share that info back with my audience. And then the other thing I want to close with are 2 interviews that I did while I was down there that I want to share some highlights from, a quick clip from each. The first here is with Lindsay Whorton, who is the president of the Holdsworth Center just outside of Austin in Texas, where they work with K-12 leaders to help develop their leadership ability, help think about their organizational design. It was really fascinating to get deep into this and to think about my experience, probably more in the private sector with Kaplan and other companies like Kaplan, and Lindsay's experience working with K-12, where, to redesign from the ground up how K-12 works, we're going to have to think differently about the roles of teachers, the roles of superintendent, and how principals, district leaders, others within the K-12 ecosystem, how are we giving them the support that they need? How are they able to truly grow into the leadership positions that are extremely difficult, and in some ways the current model is not really sustainable. So important work that Lindsay and team are doing down in Texas. It was also a conversation that probably wouldn't have happened had I not been at South by and had I not been in Texas. So I was really happy to get that opportunity to go a little deeper and to think more about where Texas may in some ways lead the way, and where some of the challenges and opportunities down there may be instructive to all of us when we think about the world around us. Here's a quick clip from my conversation with Lindsay.
I think teaching is a far more complex, intellectually intensive exercise
Also, it's emotional work too.
than most of the knowledge worker jobs that we're talking about. Why would we expect a principal to be able to support more teachers than we would expect the manager group of engineers? And so I think that's one example where, from an org design standpoint, we may not just pick up the idea and plot it thereon, but I think we should start noticing the ways in which we design schools in ways that we haven't designed any other organizations. And particularly as the average intern teacher continues to change, I don't think that the models that have worked for us 20 or 30 years ago are going to survive.
Amazing stuff there with Lindsay. Be on the lookout for that episode. And then one more episode I recorded while I was down there. This is with Dana Stephenson, who's the CEO and co-founder of a company called Riipen, one that I've been tracking for years. Riipen's actually showed up in conversations I've had with Ryan Craig and Paul Fain and other folks who are out ahead in terms of the workforce challenges that we're facing and some of the opportunities around experiential learning, job relevant experience, moving upstream into folks' higher ed experience and even into K-12 early childhood. It's good for kids and for all of us to be exploring what might be out there and to understand how that might translate into real work. There were a few conversations out there. In fact, the first question from the Trending in Ed panel down there was from Ivy Sullivan, who was really asking about Gen Z and apprenticeships. How do we break through there? How do we perhaps break out of some of the stereotypes and some of the challenges and instead start to think about designing solutions. Riipen's been doing that since they launched about 10 years ago, and Dana provided some real relevant advice for folks who are trying to get started in ed tech and for folks who are trying to tackle some of these big issues. And then, of course, provided lots of insight around the future of work, the future of project-based learning, addressing the real underlying experience gaps that are out there in the world around us, providing value to the learner, but also to the higher ed educators like my wife, and then also to the employers out there who are looking for help and looking for help that really can best be delivered by the rising generations. You know, one of the things that came up from the podcast stage was, how do we break down some of these barriers so that the generations are learning from each other and engaging with each other? Because without exposure to difference, you're not really ready for it when it confronts you. Same thing around collaboration, same thing around the pressures of really delivering on a work project. And that's something that really carries throughout our lives. Here's a quick clip from my conversation with Dana. Be on the lookout for that. It's coming down the pike to the podcast feed sometime soon.
I think we've all heard the saying, AI won't take your job, but someone who can use AI better than you might. We've also seen the stats that 70% of business leaders would rather hire someone with less experience with AI skills than someone with more experience without those skills. So I think it's incredibly important that we really, as a community in higher ed, start to explore how we can bring in AI skills into the curriculum. You know, you're not going to, ethically and responsibly, you're not going to learn AI from reading a textbook. You've got to get out there and practice. Mm-hmm. The combination of bringing project-based learning and AI together, has this, amazing impact on the learner, but it also can have this huge, amazing impact, and we're seeing it every single day on the employers. We want to create more opportunities, more jobs out there for our students, get our students working with these small businesses, help these small businesses grow. These businesses will create more jobs that will improve the economy, and there'll be more jobs and more offerings available to students. The flywheel really takes off. So I think there's a major solution here, given what's coming.
Amazing stuff there with Dana. That conversation really did get my wheels turning, and I'm hoping we can dive in further to understand what are some of the new models that are emerging that can help connect the dots. It's one of the reasons why I love talking to innovative startups like Riipen. I like talking to folks on the nonprofit and philanthropic side, because I think frequently they're trying to foster connections. Same thing around accelerators and places where we can really convene folks who may be coming at problems in different directions. There's been a lot of talk recently about connecting research to startup activity, to venture activity. Researchers and academics can sometimes operate in a silo. How can we bridge out to connect what they're learning to folks who are trying to actually build things? We'll be covering that and much, much more. Amazing time down in Austin. If you get a chance, get down there. I'd love to see you. If you are heading down there, let me know. Next big conference on the horizon for me is the ASU GSV conference in San Diego in the beginning of April. If you're heading down there, I'd love to get some time with you, either informally or we could even record things. Conferences wind up being a great time to record stuff, either formally through an event like the podcast stage session that we did, or even informally, hallway conversations, or we could find a place to have a deeper dive. Hopefully folks are enjoying what you hear. If you do, please subscribe, tell your friends, do all the good things. We love what we're doing, and we hope you're learning along the way with us. This is Trending in Ed. I'm Mike Palmer. We'll be back again soon.